Thank you very much for coming back to this session. We're here together and we're going to finally discuss with you what is in the Sun Business Network strategic plan is, what's our operational plan, how are we aiming to take this forward. And as Mark said this morning, it is a working draft. And if everything's okay, you all now have a copy of that working draft with you. I'm sure you haven't had time to look through it, but there are not many pages, so I hope that you will, after this meeting, and be able to provide your feedback. We'll have a panel of 4, and we definitely want to have an interactive session, so our interventions will be very short. I want to start by saying that this morning I felt that sometimes there were more elephants in the room than there were companies. And there, I think that what I really like to state is that it's not only difficult, it's not only about a lot of hurdles or barriers. I think actually that what we're seeing also with the people that are here in the room, we also see a very positive engagement already. Maybe careful, maybe tiny, but very positive as well. Why? Because we've got representatives here from governments that have already clearly stated that they would like to engage with private sector. We heard it yesterday when Dr. Laurie actually invited us to have a similar meeting in Tanzania. We have representatives from Nigeria where we had a business meeting about 10 days ago, I think. We have Mrs. Wafa from Kenya, where we're also discussing on how will we engage. And so I do believe that there is positive momentum. There are governments that say, yes, we want to engage and discuss with private sector. And basically there are governments that are doing that without Sun. Without a Sun Business Network. We've got, in the session before this one, we had Juan Carlos Zapata from Guatemala who was explaining what Fundesa was doing in Guatemala, and this started already. Engaging with private sector started a couple of years ago. And so they have organized themselves and they are in discussion with government on how business in Guatemala can contribute. We see that the focal points in Malawi and in Indonesia have invited businesses to be part of their platforms. And then, of course, we here have a certain number of private sector representatives that are pioneers, that are actually the diehards. They are sticking with us, even when there are so many elephants that are being mentioned and being named this morning. And I really want to thank you for that. With this meeting, and also that demonstrates how the business network wants to work, we are aiming for a multi-stakeholder dialogue. We do not want to work in silos. And we believe that although we have the different networks, we believe we can only progress if the networks have a vertical communication. And that is why we have invited representatives of all the networks, of all the different stakeholders and Sun to discuss with us here in this meeting. And that's how we want to go forward also in the future. There have been many mentions, many analogies. We've been talking about a car with 4 wheels and with the countries at the steering wheel. Jay was mentioning how in South Africa, he said, you don't negotiate with your friends, but with your enemies. I do not consider that private sector, public sector are enemies, but I do believe that it does show that only through dialogue will we progress. I think there was also a reference to sports, that you have to, it's really difficult to coach a team of 30 and you really have to focus. We were talking about movers and shakers. We were talking about traveling fast or traveling far. And of course, being Dutch, the famous polder model. This is all about consensus building, or again, all about at least being in a dialogue. Only if we talk to each other, if we talk about the elephants in the room, will we be able to go further. There's one point I think I would like to mention, because in the morning session there was a question about, and in the direct nutrition intervention session just before this one, I think it was also discussed. The one, I don't know if it's an elephant or not, but the one topic where we do know that there are differences of opinion is around infant feeding. And we do know that as nutritionists, and I am a nutritionist, we all know that breastfeeding is the best food for children exclusive breastfeeding until 6 months of age. And I think that everybody in the room will agree with that. And we also know that private sector activities in that age group have been ring-fenced by the code. And I think that's extremely important. But after 6 months of age, we have to look at the complementary feeding. We know there is some evidence that shows that the traditional diets may not bring all the nutrients and the energy that these children need. Whereas we also know there's different perspectives. There's also groups that say, but what about the traditional diets? What about dietary diversity? A lot of the activities or the behavior change activities we've been trying to do over the past decades to make sure that mothers will be able to give a diverse diet to their children. I do not believe that different perspective, it's not an either or, it's not a black or white. I do believe that what we are talking about this morning is that it's about giving Sarah more options. It's and about a diverse diet, the traditional diet, and about fortified products so that Sarah's mothers have a choice. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention. Now I would like to go to the way we have been working as co-chairs in a consultative process to come with this strategic and operational plan. I know that Herbert Smorenburg will talk a bit more about it because he has been discussing with a lot of you in the room about what your expectations were and how you'd like to see this network operate. We have been developing this in consultation with the private sector members of the lead group, with the Sun Secretariat, also in early stages with some of the stakeholders of the other groups, the other networks. So I want you to know that what is lying in front of you is already maybe a compromise or a consensus on what we, how we should operate. So that is one point I'd like to make. What you'll see is that private sector basically is pretty simple. We're talking about ABC. We don't talk about the entire alphabet. It's ABC. So we call our strategy an ABC strategy. A stands for ambassadors. Ambassadors for nutrition and ambassadors for business in nutrition. I think that is a role of the business network. Do more advocacy for business engagement in nutrition at global business fora, even those that are not necessarily focusing on nutrition, but bringing this angle in. And not necessarily only about business, but totally the advocacy for the entire nutrition spectrum. The B stands for brokering. The brokering between the public and private sector. The dialogue, building the dialogue, making sure that we do talk the same language between public sector and private sector, where one talks about beneficiaries, the other one talks about consumers, but we're talking about the same Sarah, I would say. The broker role is something that we envisage also to do very much at country level, where the country focal points see a role for the business network. This is not something that is being driven top down. As I said, I think that countries are in the driver's seat. So it's only where countries say, yes, we would like you to come in and we want to do that. Where countries see the need, they have the evidence, they want to see private sector as part of the solution, and they set up the mechanism of coordinating, and we can help and support in that. The third point, the C, is about being a center of expertise and sharing lessons of public-private partnerships in some countries, stimulating discussion or cross-fertilization between countries on how do we engage with business, as well as on what can the private sector bring to the table. So those are the three roles, I would say, we see for the business network, ABC. The priorities in the, let's say, operational priorities are really about building the network. We do have a number of private sector here, but as Mark said in the beginning, a private sector is not knocking on our door, you know, pushing their way in. It's really not so easy, except for the pioneers, to identify what's in it for them, especially not for those sectors that are not, where nutrition is not in the focus. So what about the energy sector? What about IT and logistics? How can we translate what is in it for them to be part of this Sun Business Network? And we'll have to work very hard on that, and I'd like to have the support of other businesses here in the room. We are, as I said, planning to organize meetings at different country levels in different Sun countries where the countries are ready. I know there's discussions going on for Kenya. I'm not sure if a date is being set, but I believe it will be early next year. Nigeria took already place. Tanzania is on the list. Mozambique is on the list. And I do believe that Indonesia is on the list as well. But any other country where, any other Sun country that says we want you to engage and help us to bring that fourth wheel to the car, we will find the resources and we will be able to support that process. We will not be running, I think I can fairly say that, we will not be running business networks on the ground, but we will be helping and supporting on how that can be organized and what mechanisms can be set up to do that. We believe that business has a role in that. You will hear later from Zahid about what we envisage to see as a center of expertise. It's more virtual. It's about how can we create this one-stop shop, this one electronic platform where we will share the experiences and the lessons in the different Sun countries of what you are doing, as well as what governments are doing, as well as how can we engage in other sectors. So we want that to be a very lively platform, and we'll see, I think, the very first setup. We're going to launch, but it may not be yet the full platform. We still need a little bit of work to do, but it gives you a pretty good idea, I believe. And of course, we want to actively liaise with the other networks. A very important point now is membership and governance. What I'd like to say is that this Sun Business Network, I believe, is accountable to the private sector, to the entire lead group. But we're guided by the private sector members in the lead group, who we will suggest that they appoint an advisory council that will guide the work of a more small central team in which the co-chairs will take part, but also some real small, let's say, staff, somebody who can help us coordinate daily management, as well as somebody on the communication to manage the e-platform. We have identified a set of principles, not only the Sun principles, but also general principles that actually are also being used in Global Compact on human rights, labor rights, environment, and anti-corruption. And we have as well made a specific mention of the need for members to comply with UN guidance on health and nutrition, and specifically the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, as well as World Health Assembly resolutions that relate to maternal and infant young child nutrition. We believe that's really important because we want to keep the dialogue open with everybody. It does mean that we're shutting out a number of companies of this dialogue at this very moment, but we do believe that we want to have, with as many stakeholders as possible, keep them on the table, and so that is the trade-off that we've made. And then finally, how are we going to demonstrate that? We want companies to demonstrate their commitment by signing up to those, committing to those principles, as well as what is the commitment, their commitment to action on the ground in Sun country ABC, name it. So that's what we're going to do, and I'd like now to hand over to Martin, co-chair WFP, to ask what his contributions are to the Sun Business Network.
Thank you, Marti. I'd like to be short, but I would like to start with a kind of, I think, philosophical discussion about that. I think what's happening in the world is that many countries are moving from or are transforming from a pre-modern society where agriculture was the main source of I would say, the economic movement to much more modern societies. And you see that in many places. China is, of course, a very strong example, Brazil, but you see it in many other places. The development world has always focused over the past 30, 40 years or so on supporting that kind of concept. So the communities were central to pre-modern societies, and if you wanted to move this forward, you had to focus on to make those communities stronger and do the activities, particularly in those places. modern societies are different, of course. There, people become more individual, the community become weaker, and because of weaker communities, also the support system is much more to an individual level. In the world of the UN, it's a similar activity takes place. There is, for example, in the field of World Food Programme, where originally we do food transfers to communities. We're going more and more in the direction of in cash transfers and vouchers transfers. So much more to individual support. And in modern societies, of course, the private sector is extremely important. So whether you like it or not, I think that will happen. It will happen at the global level, it will happen at the regional level, it will happen at country level. And I think what the struggle we have now is that we have a kind of mixed type of support system. You know, I come from the NGO world where we focus much more on community-based programming. Well, in fact, within the UN, it's bigger. You know, we understand systems, we understand food systems. We're looking much more as a structural support of health care systems or food systems. So you can see that switch is happening, and of course that gives tension. And it gives tension between, I would say, if you look at the four wheels, which has been mentioned, the civil society, the donors, and you know, the business network we are in, and as well as the UN network. But the business network is the only network which, in fact, has all different players. They are players, what was mentioned yesterday, that a lot of people who are working, or our beneficiaries, are actually in contact of, are working for the private sector. So they not only cannot benefit only from a direct effect of working with the food industry, but also that, in fact, if you talk about the exclusive breastfeeding, if there's no facility in those companies where they work, that they can actually, you know, bring the baby for the first 6 months, it's a problem. So you can see that a business network goes beyond, in fact, only the food industry or industries which are related directly with, in fact, the problem of nutrition. Based on that, you can see that one of the key elements we are facing in the field of HIV/AIDS is the link between the health systems and the food systems. The idea that you could, like, for example, when people got on treatment, when they are malnourished, they have a 6 times higher risk of dying when they are on treatment when they're malnourished. So in most of the places where we start treatment programs, nutrition is a very important component. But the health system is already quite poor and very weak. So the moment you add the food distribution to a health system, it doesn't work. And that's why World Food Programme and other players are experimenting with credit cards, how we, you know, provide like food by prescription. The physician gives you the credit card, and you can go to the foods, you know, to the shop, and there you can actually get for a subsidized price certain products. So you can see that the link between that is very important. Yeah, different stages in that. I know that, for example, Peter Timmer, one of the food economists, is focusing a lot on the importance of the supermarkets. Supermarkets are determine a lot of what the production is at the local level, because they want a same quality of product constantly available throughout the year. And they are sometimes even more important than governments when it comes to the demand side to farmers. So what we need to deal with is, in fact, a lot of new systems in place. And I think coming back to, I think, what Fokke was saying this morning, we have a very good group here. But of course, the group who are involved directly or indirectly in this field are much larger than that. And I don't think it's bad that we have a small group. I think that's the same in HIV/AIDS. But we have to realize that, of course, the network is much bigger than we think about at this particular moment. I personally think that the business network is the most important network because of its complexity and because of its connection with many different players. Lawrence just said that, you know, at his session, that he's not in favor of the private sector, he's not against the private sector. He understands it's a player, and we have to actually learn how this works. And the connection between public sector and private sector is very often what people are saying. What is the evidence? And for the private sector, the evidence is whether you can make more money. And if there's no more money, then of course, why would you invest? But I think also in the private sector, what I've heard yesterday from Paul Polman is very interesting, is that there maybe are different indicators, even for the private sector in the future, that human capital, the improvement of human capital, could be one of the indicators. And I know that Danone already had experiments with some of their stocks that they said, okay, partially you can do returns in an improved human capital as well as in some financial support in the project they did in Bangladesh. So I think there are interesting options, and I don't think the answer is there, but I believe even when the sun maybe is going under, I hope that the business network will remain. The third point I want to make is about the code. It is something I think is extremely important. All nutritionists recognize, of course, that exclusive breastfeeding is essential. But I think we need an objective measure, an objective tool to say which company is violating the code and to what extent. Because at this particular moment, I know that the FTSE for Good, and it was like Gain presented that in one of their board meetings, is very interesting. And Nestle was, I think, the only company who submitted their what do you call it, membership. And they were approved by FTSE for Good. But it doesn't mean anything if I see that the comments are still there, they're still on the blacklist. So I was wondering whether this Sun business network could actually establish something that we have an objective measure and say, okay, this is what you have to do, and if you violate the rule, then you violate it. But that we should not be dependent on, you know, like a small group who maybe even doesn't have the capacity to measure the problem of the code. The last comment I want to make is what Marti already said, is about that the countries are in the driver's seat. We were just 3 weeks ago with Dave Nabarro and Werner Schulten from UNICEF. We were in Indonesia. And I thought it was fascinating. School example how a country picked up the Sun movement and said, we're going to do it. You know, many ministries were involved. They were committed. They had a meeting. They were not asking, you know, like immediately what they needed for money. But what I thought was very interesting, Ibu Nina, who is the focal point of the Sun movement in Indonesia, she made a very interesting distinction between the different companies they worked with. There were already 4 companies who were part of the Sun. There was no discussion about it. The Indonesian government had accepted them as the 4 companies. The first company was Pertamina, it's the national oil industry. The number 2 was Astra, which was a huge car company. They do Toyota. And then they had Indofood and Garuda Food. Indofood is one of the largest, I think, food companies in the world, I think, even despite it's a local company. But they export, I think, to more than 40 countries already. Then she made a comment about some of the formula companies. She said, you know, we have to work with them, and it's difficult because, you know, we see that there are some issues with it. And I thought it was really interesting. So the government already had their own approach how to deal with this issue of formula companies as well as with food companies. But then there was a comment from UNICEF that in fact the law of Indonesia was not according to the WHO code, because they only had 1 year breastfeeding promoted and not 2 years. And I thought this is also interesting, because now you have a country who's doing a really good job, and you still have that you know, people always look at the glass half full and of half empty, in fact, and half full, because I think in principle, if we are very serious about that countries are in the driver's seat and they do everything right, that we shouldn't be the policeman all the time of thinking what they should do it in a different way. It's a pity that Indonesia is not here at the moment, because I thought it was a perfect example of how, in fact, the private sector will be involved, and even more so in the future. And the leader of the Indofood is an extremely interesting person who is extremely dedicated. And I do believe that, yes, we would like to have a lot of different companies, but I think the Bill Gates of the world and the Paul Polman and the, you know, Feike Sijbesma and, you know, Buffett, for example, those are leaders of the world. And I think that's the beginning of a change how we deal with nutrition. And I am extremely pleased with this meeting. This is the beginning. And we can't weed out those leaders, because we will have many obstacles in our road to, in fact, the solution of the problem. But without these leaders, we can't move forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin, and I thank you for bringing up the example of Indonesia. And indeed, I think Ibu Nina and other representatives wanted to come, and that was, I don't think they got their visa in time to even jump on a plane and be here in time. But I think it's a very relevant example. I'd like to ask Herbert Smorenburg, who has had the discussions, who has been part actually driving this consultative process in the past, I would say 2 months, to share with us a couple of, let's say, the insights or a couple of the main highlights of what you heard from business and other people that you've interviewed.
Yeah. Is it on now? Because I had a cough. Yeah. Thank you, Marti. And I must say, I had a very pleasant last 2 months speaking to a variety of people that are somehow involved in nutrition already or want to get involved. And let's not forget, we're talking a lot about business and private sector and companies, but I had conversations with a number of people. And what struck me is the passion that people displayed and saying, actually, you know what, I want to do this because I believe in my generation, in the sort of, I can leave a legacy in my country, I can do something. And that was an enormous intrinsic motivator to get things done on the ground. The other thing that clearly came across is the bias for action that people have. And so we were going a little bit through the structure of this whole network, etc. But what people really want is getting things moving on the ground, getting together, do things, and actually there is an enormous bias for action, and I think that is a great asset to have as part of this network. When I asked them, what do you need, what are your expectations from a business network like we're setting up, I think there were a couple of comments, and a very common theme that came through is building trust. Yeah, so they want to work. They realize that public-private partnerships are required, and I think I've spoken to many companies that are intrinsically good, but they feel that they are sort of put in a corner as a common denominator. Business is evil, and so that we need to break through that, and that is clearly an area where the business network could help. How do you do that? I think transparency was a key word that came up in many of the discussions. Concrete examples that show that businesses are doing good and can contribute to solutions. So I think essentially this brokering role that Marti spoke about is how we translated it into the brokering role, building trust, transparency, convening different parties, being solutions focused. The other answer to my question is what can we provide, is what can we learn from other countries. I'm here in the Sudan, but hey, what's going on elsewhere in the world? What we don't have to reinvent, but we can steal with pride. And so that is the center of expertise, the communication that we can help businesses, governments, NGOs at the ground with to see what's available there, what's already done. And then some of the countries, the companies asked, what are the low-hanging fruits? We want to get involved, but what are the solutions? What is the toolbox of solutions that we can apply? So I think that comes back in the ABC strategy, brokering and center of expertise. I think there were 2 points of advice that were given to me or to the business network. One is clearly establish the link of local development and in particularly local agricultural development. Local food, food is emotional, food that is the engine of local development. So establish a clear link between nutrition and agriculture. And that's what we have picked up, and I think if you read through the document, clearly the link to Grow Africa, it was mentioned this morning, which is part of the new vision on agriculture, is there. The other point of advice was don't start a whole new structure, meetings, etc. No other Christmas trees, if that's an appropriate word in this time of the year. Use as much as possible existing structures, existing events, and really focus on on-the-ground activities rather than building a new structure. So leverage what we have got, leverage the initiatives that multinationals, local companies already there, but bring things together. So I was very inspired by those conversations, and hopefully you find your inputs back in this document. I mean, I've spoken with a number of you before we drafted this document. I've spoken with another set of people sort of while we were circulating the first draft, but we have taken your inputs as much as possible into account, and that's how we came to this stage, Marti.
Thank you, Herbert, and I'm glad that we also got some advice on the how, and not only this is what you should do, but also help on, you know, how then do we do it, because we should not forget that this is relatively new. I mean, if we're talking about sitting private sector being a fourth wheel, it is really also a new way. So we're learning as we're going. It's not as if there's a blueprint out there. I would like to ask Zahid if you could then, I mean, if we're talking about concrete, what are we concretely going to do? What is it as one of the tools that we're going to develop with the help of people here in the room to share the experience, share the stories, share the lessons learned, and make sure that there's some cross-fertilization between some countries? Zahid, over to you.
Thank you, Marti. I think there's two really exciting trends at the moment, which I think are an important context for this conversation. One is the power of technology to transform the way we relate to each other, so the human relationships that we can build. The technology itself is not the important thing, it's actually what we can use that for. And so we're seeing ways that technology is being used to transform the way we communicate, connect, collaborate, catalyze action, and hopefully through all of that make some real change. So I think that's one thing that's very exciting around the growth of social media and online communities and so on. So we can work together in ways that actually we couldn't have done even a short time ago. The second important trend, I think, is this real emergence in a deep dive look at how you can harness business for development impact. And some of the people in this room, Jane Nelson, Gib Bullock, Graham Baxter, are at the forefront of that conversation. But I think that also is a very important broad trend that we're seeing. And so we, as Business Fights Poverty, really try to bring those two trends together and now have created what is the world's largest online community looking at business and development. We have about 11,000 members in just over 200 countries. And we host lots of conversations and interactions around different aspects of a broader agenda, whether it's about how do you measure your impact, how do you work with smallholder farmers, and so on. And we also do that on nutrition. And so we're delighted to be the host of the e-platform that you're building for the Sun Business Network. And what we can hopefully bring to that is a broader context of conversations that are happening, which are relevant, but at the same time use our own experience to help do the things that you want to do around collaborating together and sharing and hopefully catalyzing some real action. So I wonder if we can just show the beta site on the screen. So this is, just to give you a sort of the first preview, this is a premiere in the sense of this platform. We've tried to keep it very simple, so there's really just 5 things we've tried to focus on. The first is there will be a section on the site for sharing insights. We've had lots of those in the last day or so. There'll be a place here for you to share your insights, things you've learnt, things you'd like to share. The second main category is case studies, and there was, you know, I don't know about you, but I've been really inspired by the working group sessions, and there's some really interesting stuff that's going on, some real insights. And one of the comments in the last session I was in was a comment that there should be an easier way, there needs to be an easier way to share what people are learning and what you know, the results are of different types of intervention. The third main area is around resources, so that's access to research, to results, to studies that have been done. And so you can access all those things very easily. If you could scroll down a little bit on that screen, please. What we've tried to do is we've got this sort of Google map here, so you can actually access any of that through where it's geographically relevant. There's also just 2 other things just to mention. We've got a section on forums by country, and that was a really quite important message I think that's come out, is the need to have this driven by the country level. So we've created a space for conversations to happen at the country level. And then the final 5th area is about the community. So we've built a section which is around how you as members can engage with each other. If you could just scroll back up a bit and click on Nigeria, just give you a quick example of one of the bits of content here. So what would happen is when you click on Nigeria on that map, that number 1 showed you there was 1 content item for Nigeria, and obviously eventually there'll be hopefully hundreds. But once you get to the Nigeria section, if you click on that article there in Nigeria, that's an insight article written by Liere, again manager from Nigeria. And that was a write-up of a particular session that was had. It's got, you can embed all sorts of content that you might want to in that. And so hopefully it will become an engaging way to find and access and post content. One thing we found now on Business Fights Poverty is that all the content on the site is generated by users. There's very little that we have to generate ourselves. And what we would like to get to a point, you know, sometime down the road, is for all of you to be the authors of the content that is on this site. As you mentioned, Marti, this is a beta site. We will be monitoring how it's being used, which bits are successful, what we need to change, and we will continue to keep this flexible. But I guess that's, in a nutshell, what we're trying to build. And hopefully it will help facilitate, as a practical tool, some of the things you're talking about around building knowledge sharing, coalitions, and hopefully action.
Thank you very much, Zahid. The website will be, I think, will we put it up and running as of tonight? Or?
Yes, that's right. So the domain name is sunbusinessnetwork.org. While it's in beta stage, there's an extra /BFP at the end. But
the BFP for Business Fights Poverty.
Yeah, we'll remove that once we're happy with everything running. Yeah. And also, please send us your comments.
Yeah. So of course, it's still very much in work in progress. It's also through this site that we'll ask companies to sign up, and also there we'll have public statements on commitments, because we would like to go through. We've been looking a little bit at Every Woman, Every Child, about global compact, on how do we display and make commitments of companies that are supportive of Sun. How do we make that public, and so that it's transparent as well for all stakeholders. Now, we haven't had yet the time or the resources to think everything through. So you could sign up now, but we don't have yet the template for, displaying the commitments, etc. We'll be working in that in the coming weeks, and then probably early next year or somewhere in January we'll be having that. So what I actually would say is everybody who is here, we will send at that moment an invite to go to the website and to, if you're interested, to sign up and to put a declaration of commitment, for which we will then have a template. We also would like this should not be, I would say, unique case studies only for the Sun Business Network. I think I very much believe in the Steal with Pride. I very much believe that if there's some great case, like what you said about these credit cards and vouchers, please, can we, if it's online for WFP, can we make a link, can we put it in here, so that people that find this site will also be able to find information related to how private sector works through this one, by a link or whatever. So that's the idea behind it. I don't know exactly how much time we have, but actually in my schedule it says that we will have table discussions, but I suggest we'll simplify a little bit. I want to give the floor to you now, and there were two main questions, but feel free to ask any other questions if you want. But what we'd like to hear from you is very much what are, according to you, the strategic priorities for this business network over the coming year? How should these future priorities be determined? Also, I would say, how can we mobilize country-level networks, and how can they best drive forward specific nutrition partnerships or policies? I have got 10 minutes, and that means that I will be able to give, like, I would say 3 people very briefly the floor, and then also ask somebody to react back to that. So, who has the first question?
Thank you very much, moderator. Mine is a comment and a question at the same time. The whole issue of complementary feeding indeed is very key for our first 1,000 days. As you mentioned earlier, there's the International Code of Breast Milk Substitutes, well understood. But there's the subsequent World Health Assembly resolutions for complementary feeding. Countries have already taken a position. For example, I think it's World Health Assembly 22.23, which clearly states that countries are being encouraged to promote use of indigenous, locally available foods. For obvious reasons, use of processed foods at that stage also leads to obesity and then future risk of other things. So countries have taken a position, like Kenya we took for that. I would just want to know, in terms of guidance, to what extent has the Scaling Up Nutrition movement been able to read those resolutions, then inform the business network, so that as companies are coming up to assist countries, they can be able to take that into context? That is my question. Thank you very much.
Another question.
Anne Hewen from Unilever. I think a very practical thing, you've talked about not really setting up new structures, which I think is correct. But I think we do really need to try as much as possible know what's coming up. So where are the country meetings this year? Where are the things that we can link with? I mean, obviously that's all part of business connecting and actually scaling up nutrition. So I think practically we need a bit more of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do we feed back to the document? If we don't finish it by today and write down and leave it with you, is there an email we can send feedback to?
Good point, yeah.
Let me start to say that we all know that, of course, the first 1,000 days is essential. And after 6 months, what is key to be successful in preventing stunting is that children consume the right nutrients. It's not about the right food, it's actually the right nutrients who are actually, of course, in the food. And that's necessary, at least for the first 2 years. What is critical, if you look at that, if you are stunted, in fact, is one of the main risk factors for obesity and for long-term health consequences if you look at diabetes and chronic diseases. And we see already, for example, in India and in Pakistan that there are percentage-wise more people dying from cardiovascular diseases than, for example, in the UK. So stunting is definitely one of the key factors for long-term chronic diseases. There is absolutely no evidence. In fact, it's the opposite. If you look at Holland, I gave it yesterday as an example, that if you consume the right products, if you use the right products in the first 2 years, which is mainly in most of the places in the north are processed food products, the children actually grow very well, they are not stunted, and it's not the factor where they become obese. In fact, very often when they already start to have empty calories in the beginning, that's an issue. So I think there's no relationship between the consumption of processed food or local food, that one is better than the other when it comes to the prevention of stunting or the risk of having long-term negative effects. However, of course, it is much more cost-effective to use local products for complementary food, if possible. And that's why I think the world has developed these micronutrient powders, which can add to it so that, in fact, the nutrients are right, of the Nutri-Butter, where we add some fatty acids so that we can still complement the food. There are many different options how to make a local porridge or a local diet for the children in the first 2 years more nutrient effective in a way. But I think it has to be quite different if you look at the effects of breastfeeding and the importance of exclusive breastfeeding and breastfeeding in general in the first 2 years for many different reasons, than in fact looking at complementary food and say that processed food is not the right way to go. And I think actually the opposite. I believe there's an extremely important role to play in that sense for the private sector. A good example of successes is, in fact, if you look at Niger and Haiti, particularly Haiti, where they had quite a high stunting rate. They had this, of course, the disaster, the earthquake a couple of years ago, and UNICEF and WFP came in with the right complementary food, it's all processed food, and we reduced stunting by 10% in a couple of years, starting, in fact, with the emergency as the first step to bring in the right food at the right time for those particular age group. So I think the discussion is not over on that topic, but I do feel that it's one of the dangers, in fact, if we start to talk about complementary food and connect with the code. It can be quite dangerous. I think also that there's some people are claiming, and I've seen that also, that in fact, complementary food will diminish, in fact, the fact that people are not anymore doing breastfeeding. I don't think that's the case either. There's no evidence for that. But there's a lot of evidence, of course, that the external circumstances, like the work circumstances of many women in the world, that they have to go to work, that they are not allowed to do breastfeeding, are very critical in keeping women doing breastfeeding for the first 2 years. And I think we have to look at those social factors more than I think that we look at the food factor.
Thank you, Martin. And I think responding on what is the stance the SBN or the Sun Business Network takes, I think we do not take our own stance. We do believe that we have to stick to the WHO guidelines. I do believe, however, that it's also a role maybe to bring and line up all the evidence that is there. And also to make a difference between what is an interpretation of the evidence and what is the evidence, and make sure that we have the right balance in there. So that's something that we should be. The second and third question, I think, are very practical. So ones that I'm not sure if this is the ones that I can answer. And you actually asked about kind of an agenda. What's coming up, and that's definitely one of the things that will be on that e-platform. So for meetings that we're going to organize in country that may be of interest of members of the Sun Business Network, we'll define a couple of steps on how to engage with people that are interested, but also how to announce that in a kind of agenda of events through this e-platform. So that is one point. And the other one, Kate, I think, is about the feedback. And I actually have to say, do we have a Sun Business Network email address, or can we create that maybe?
Great one.
We can create that, because otherwise what you can do, you can send it all to me, but mvanliere at gainhealth.org, but I think it's better that we create a separate one, not to clog my inbox, but we'll definitely make sure that we all will have a good look at your input. So we'll create one that we'll also put on the website, I think, so that if you have feedback through businessnetwork.org, you'll find an address to which you can send your inputs and feedback, and otherwise, if you can't find it, just come to me. And there was a last point. I'll take, let's say, 1 minute, Lawrence. Is that possible? Very good. So, so enforcing the rules of engagement, I think it's more like people have to state their commitment to that. So we're not going to upfront say you have to demonstrate with all kinds of heavy documents that you're doing this, that you're doing that, that you're doing that. But we want a formal statement that in time format, a letter or something that states from each member, yes, we will commit to these principles, we are committed to this and that. And then I think it's like you're not guilty until proven guilty. Yes, that will be a register, if you wish, a public register of this commitment. I think it's important to say that the website, the biggest part of the website, our intent is it's completely open to everybody. So all the general information, I think it's not about membership only. This is about sharing a lot of interesting case studies with people across the world, even if they're not members of the Sun Business Network or participating in Sun. There will be, and we'll look at it, there may be some discussions that we will say, well, there may be some thematic areas that we'll start a discussion around, and that we may have a more confined audience. But the basic principle is an open audience for everybody. And I think this is one of the crucial points. Transparency. Lots of questions about where's your conflict, how do you deal with conflict of interest, how do you deal with transparency, how do you hold people accountable? We are trying to be as transparent as possible. We are open to all the stakeholders. I think really this is where we have representatives of all the four wheels of the car. That is how we try to be held accountable, transparent in what we're trying to do. I honestly believe this is the way forward, and I do hope that with the other networks we'll have a very good exchange also in their meetings. I don't think we have any more time, so I'm going to round off with that call for you to give us input to sign up, not now, but probably in January, to sign up as a member or a supporter or however we're going to do that, and to very actively, please help us populate this site. Be proud of what you're doing and help us to share it so that others can learn from it as well, and we'll be able to draw lessons from you, maybe contact you directly, etc. We cannot do that by ourselves, as Zahid said. We don't want to do it. There are so many great stories. We had what we had in the breakout sessions from Guatemala, from Kenya, from PSI, what they're doing. We'll have things in Tanzania. We had the example of Sean de Crene on Growth Africa. I think all of those, let's steal with pride. Please help us and be proud of what we can steal from you so that we share it here on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you.